The storage facility sat behind a strip mall outside Columbus, Ohio. Rows of metal doors lined a narrow concrete corridor. The place smelled like dust, cardboard, and old motor oil. Most units held boring things nobody wanted at home. Holiday decorations, broken furniture, boxes of forgotten clothes. Night security cameras watched the hallway without blinking. A tired guard named Mike checked the monitors every hour. Nothing unusual ever happened in this building. Until Thursday morning. Just before sunrise, Mike walked down the corridor with a paper cup of coffee. He stopped halfway down the hall and frowned. One storage unit door stood half open. That alone was strange for this quiet place. Inside, the overhead light flickered weakly. A woman lay on the concrete floor near the back wall. Her name was Lisa, according to the wallet nearby. She looked like she collapsed while standing. There were no signs of struggle anywhere. No broken boxes, no scattered tools, nothing disturbed. But the floor showed something deeply wrong. Thin white threads stretched across the concrete like spider webs. Hundreds of them branched and spread in delicate lines. They radiated from a dark spill near Lisa's feet. The shapes looked organic, almost alive. Yet they were solid, brittle, and strangely shiny. Mike crouched carefully and touched one with his pen. The thread snapped with a soft, glassy click. He stared at the strange white network. Spider webs do not grow from the floor overnight, and concrete does not suddenly sprout crystals like frost. Police arrived within minutes, lights flashing across the empty parking lot. Detectives stepped inside the storage unit and froze. The white network had grown thicker since Mike first saw it. Delicate branches crawled across the floor like frozen lightning. Crime scene technician Carla knelt beside the strange formation. She lifted a fragment with tweezers and squinted. "It's not mold," she said quietly. Detective Ray looked unconvinced and slightly irritated. The substance cracked sharply when Carla pressed it. It behaved more like brittle plastic or mineral, but nobody had poured concrete additives here. The floor looked like it had grown thin crystal grass. Even stranger, the pattern spread from a small puddle stain. The stain looked dry now, chalky around the edges. Ray studied the woman lying nearby. There were no visible injuries anywhere on her body. No blood, no bruises, no defensive wounds. Paramedics confirmed she was already dead hours earlier. Her skin felt unusually cold for the indoor temperature. The storage unit heater vent sat silent and dusty. Nothing suggested freezing conditions inside that room. Yet the white threads resembled frost patterns after winter storms. Carla sealed several samples in plastic evidence bags. Under bright lights, the crystals glittered sharply. They looked like tiny needles branching again and again. Ray shook his head slowly. "We're not chasing ghost chemistry today," he muttered. Lisa likely overdosed or suffered a sudden heart failure. The strange floor residue must be unrelated junk, maybe spilled packing material or cheap insulation foam. The coroner's report later mentioned possible cardiac arrest. Toxicology results were inconclusive, but not suspicious. No signs of violence meant no homicide investigation. Within 3 weeks, the file was closed quietly. The strange white webs became a footnote nobody explained. 3 months later, the evidence boxes sat untouched in a county archive. The case carried a simple label: accidental death. Detective Ray felt relieved the paperwork was finished. Storage units rarely hide complicated crimes. Most mysteries there involve unpaid rent and abandoned mattresses. The official report blamed stress and possible substance use. Lisa had recently lost her job downtown. Her financial records showed several overdue bills. Stress can break a heart without warning. At least that was the convenient explanation. The strange white formations were classified as harmless residue. A lab assistant guessed it might be dried cleaning chemicals. Another technician suggested crystallized road salt contamination. Neither theory was tested very carefully. Nobody believed the floor patterns mattered anyway. Lisa's family quietly accepted the medical conclusion. No suspects existed, and no obvious motive appeared. Detectives prefer cases that end without loose threads, but one person would eventually notice the problem. The photographs inside the evidence file showed branching needles, long, delicate geometric structures spreading across concrete. They looked uncannily organized for random residue. Nature sometimes leaves patterns with hidden rules. Physics and chemistry love repeating structures, but those patterns usually appear under controlled conditions, not suddenly overnight inside a storage locker. The report ignored one inconvenient detail. The white structures were not present earlier that night. Security footage proved the floor looked normal at midnight. By sunrise, the room contained hundreds of crystal threads. Something liquid must have changed extremely fast. Liquids do not normally grow solid forests in seconds, unless the chemistry is waiting for exactly the right moment. Morning light filled the small forensic laboratory at Ohio State University. Glass beakers lined the bench like patient witnesses. Dr. Daniel Reed adjusted his microscope and leaned closer. A thin crystal structure glittered under the lens. Reed loved patterns more than people. Chemistry rarely lies when examined carefully. Molecules follow rules, even when humans break them. He photographed the structure with slow precision. Each branch split into smaller needle shapes, perfect angles repeated like frozen lightning. His graduate student Maya watched quietly nearby. "Another weird crystallization sample?" she asked. Reed nodded without looking away. Supersaturated solutions often behave dramatically. Liquids sometimes hide unstable chemistry beneath calm surfaces. Add a trigger, and everything changes instantly. The liquid reorganizes into solid structures within seconds. Crystals grow outward like tiny expanding trees. People imagine slow mineral growth in caves. Reality can move much faster under the right conditions. Reed wrote notes in small, neat handwriting. Every observation mattered, even boring ones. His method followed 3 quiet steps. First observe, then test, then doubt your own explanation. If a theory survives doubt, keep it. If not, throw it away without regret. Science worked best when ego stayed outside the laboratory. Reed finally leaned back and stretched his shoulders. The crystals looked beautiful but ordinary. Just another day studying strange behavior in liquids. Then his phone buzzed on the metal table. A county evidence officer had sent an email. Attached were several crime scene photographs. Reed opened the first image and froze. The photograph showed a concrete floor covered in white branching lines. Reed felt a sudden jolt of curiosity. The structures looked painfully familiar. Not mold, not salt, not insulation foam. They looked exactly like rapid crystallization patterns. But those usually appear in controlled laboratory demonstrations, not inside a random storage locker. Maya leaned over his shoulder and squinted. "Those look like sodium acetate crystals," she said slowly. Reed nodded once, thoughtful and cautious. That chemical forms dramatic needle webs during sudden crystallization, but speculation without evidence means nothing. The email included a short message from Detective Ray. He wanted a quick opinion about the strange residue. Officially, the case was already closed. Reed could simply reply with a vague laboratory explanation. That would take 5 minutes and end the matter. Option 1 meant staying safe and uninvolved. Option 2 meant reopening uncomfortable questions about a death. Scientists rarely enjoy stepping into police investigations. Courtrooms prefer certainty, while science thrives on doubt. Reed stared again at the branching white network. The shapes looked too organized for random chemicals. They resembled textbook photographs of rapid phase change, a liquid suddenly turning solid after a tiny disturbance. He sighed and closed the email briefly. Ignoring the pattern felt dishonest to his own method. Observation demanded testing, even when inconvenient. He reopened the message and typed a short reply. "I would like to examine the physical samples." 10 minutes later, Detective Ray called his phone. The detective sounded tired but curious. Reed agreed to visit the evidence room that afternoon. The county evidence locker smelled like paper and disinfectant. Metal shelves held hundreds of sealed plastic containers. Ray greeted Reed with a cautious handshake. "I still think this case is boring," Ray admitted. "But those photos bothered me later." Reed appreciated that honesty immediately. Curiosity keeps investigations alive, longer than pride. Ray placed 3 evidence bags on the table. Inside them sat brittle white fragments from the floor. The pieces looked like broken needles and thin branches. Reed opened one bag carefully and lifted a fragment. The crystal snapped softly between his fingers. That sharp crack told him something important. Foam or insulation would bend instead. True crystals break cleanly, along internal planes. Reed placed a tiny piece under a portable microscope. Needle clusters appeared instantly on the screen. Each branch grew from a central spine, exactly like rapid sodium acetate crystallization structures. Still, guessing is not proof. He asked Ray about the original spill location. Ray pulled up the crime scene photographs again. The branching network radiated from a dark puddle stain. Reed zoomed into the center carefully. Something unusual appeared around the edge. The concrete showed faint heat discoloration. That detail made Reed sit upright suddenly. Crystallization of sodium acetate releases heat during formation. The reaction feels warm in your hand during experiments. Ray frowned slowly at the screen. "You're saying the floor heated itself?" "Possibly," Reed answered quietly. "Which means something triggered a very fast chemical change." Ray drove Reed back to the storage facility that same afternoon. The corridor looked ordinary under harsh fluorescent lights. Concrete floors, metal doors, stale recycled air. Nothing suggested dramatic chemistry had happened there recently. Maintenance staff had already cleaned the storage unit thoroughly. Only faint chalky marks remained where the crystals once spread. Reed crouched near the center stain and studied the floor. The discoloration still formed a rough, circular patch. Heat sometimes leaves subtle shadows inside porous concrete. Ray watched quietly from the doorway. "What exactly are we looking for?" he asked. "Context," Reed answered without looking up. "Chemistry rarely happens alone without physical preparation. Someone had to bring that liquid here intentionally. Supersaturated sodium acetate does not appear by accident." Reed walked slowly around the storage unit interior. Boxes had been removed, leaving dusty rectangular outlines. One corner showed faint scrape marks on the floor. Something heavy once stood there temporarily. Reed examined the nearby wall carefully. A narrow metal shelf hung slightly crooked above the marks. Its surface still carried a thin white residue. Ray rubbed the shelf with a gloved finger. The powder looked similar to the crystal fragments, but the shelf stood several feet away from the spill center. That detail made little sense at first. Reed photographed everything with methodical patience. The two locations refused to connect logically. The spill originated near Lisa's body. The residue on the shelf suggested earlier preparation, yet the distance between them remained unexplained. Two clues now existed in separate places. Neither one explained the other. Later that evening, Reed returned to his quiet laboratory. Maya sat at a desk reviewing crystal images. She glanced up as Reed entered. "You look like chemistry punched you today," she joked. Reed placed the evidence fragments under bright lights. Needle crystals still sparkled under magnification. The structure matched sodium acetate almost perfectly. But the crime scene timing remained impossible. The spill looked liquid shortly before midnight. By sunrise, the floor showed dense crystal webs. Crystallization normally begins seconds after disturbance, not hours later inside a quiet storage room. Reed paced slowly between the benches. Something about the delay bothered him deeply. Maya watched him think silently for a minute. Then she picked up a reusable heat pack nearby. She flexed the small metal disc inside it. Instant white crystals raced through the clear liquid pouch. The pack warmed quickly in her hand. "Hand warmers use sodium acetate too," she said casually. Reed stopped walking immediately. The crystallization wave spread across the pack in seconds, but the liquid remained stable before the metal disc snapped. That tiny trigger started the entire phase change. Reed suddenly understood the missing piece. Supersaturated liquids can wait quietly until disturbed. The delay was not impossible after all. The next morning, Reed prepared a controlled experiment. He dissolved sodium acetate powder in boiling water carefully. The solution held far more chemical than normal liquid allows. When cooled slowly, it remained clear and unstable. That state is called supersaturation in chemistry. The liquid contains hidden crystals waiting to appear. Reed poured the cooled solution into a glass tray. It looked completely ordinary under laboratory lights. Maya leaned closer with growing interest. "So the liquid just waits like this?" she asked. "Exactly," Reed said, holding a metal probe. "The system balances on a fragile, energetic edge. One disturbance lets molecules suddenly lock together." He touched the probe lightly to the liquid surface. Instantly, a white needle formed around the tip. Then branching crystals raced across the tray. The entire liquid solidified within seconds. Heat spread through the glass container quickly. Maya laughed softly in amazement. "It looks like frozen lightning," she said. Reed nodded and reset the experiment carefully. This time he changed only one variable. He left the liquid undisturbed inside a sealed container. Minutes passed with no crystallization at all. Then he dropped a tiny seed crystal inside. The reaction exploded across the liquid immediately. Needle webs spread exactly like the crime scene photographs. Reed leaned back slowly in his chair. The mechanism now made perfect scientific sense. But one troubling question remained unanswered. Who placed the unstable liquid in that storage room? Ray returned to the laboratory the next afternoon. Reed had already prepared the demonstration carefully. A glass tray sat on the bench filled with clear liquid. It looked harmless, like ordinary water. Ray folded his arms and watched skeptically. "That killed a woman?" he asked. "Not directly," Reed replied calmly. "But it explains the impossible webs on your floor." He held up a small jar of white powder. "This is sodium acetate," Reed said. "It dissolves easily in hot water. When enough dissolves, the liquid becomes supersaturated. That means it holds more dissolved material than normally possible. The molecules want to form crystals immediately, but they cannot start without a trigger. The liquid waits silently, sometimes for hours." Reed touched the tray with a metal probe. A bright white crystal burst outward instantly. Branching needles raced across the liquid surface. Within seconds, the entire tray turned solid. Ray leaned forward with raised eyebrows. "That looks exactly like the storage unit floor," he said. Reed nodded and pointed to the thermometer. The temperature climbed several degrees rapidly. Crystallization releases heat during the phase change. That explains the warm discoloration in the concrete. The branching shape also matches sodium acetate structures. Each crystal grows from microscopic molecular alignment. The pattern spreads outward from the first seed point. Ray rubbed his chin thoughtfully. So someone spilled a supersaturated solution, he said slowly. Exactly, Reed answered, but the spill alone would crystallize immediately. The delay means the liquid remained undisturbed at first. Then something triggered the reaction hours later. A vibration, a touch, or a tiny seed crystal. Ray stared at the frozen tray. Meaning someone planned that chemical trick, he said quietly. The reconstruction began with the shelf marks inside the storage unit. Reed returned there with Ray the following morning. The crooked metal shelf now made more sense. It likely held a container of hot sodium acetate solution earlier. The residue on the shelf matched the crystal samples exactly. Someone prepared the unstable liquid inside the unit. They needed heat to dissolve large amounts of powder. Portable camping stoves can easily provide that heat. Ray checked the facility trash records afterward. Maintenance logs mentioned a discarded propane canister outside. The timeline started forming slowly in their minds. First, the killer prepared a supersaturated solution on the shelf. The hot liquid cooled quietly inside a container. During cooling, it stayed clear but dangerously unstable. Then the person carried the container near Lisa. They spilled or poured the liquid onto the floor. At that moment, nothing dramatic happened yet. The puddle looked like ordinary water. Lisa likely believed it was harmless liquid. But the solution still waited for a trigger. When Lisa stepped across the spill, everything changed instantly. Her shoe probably introduced microscopic crystals or vibrations. The reaction exploded through the liquid like a chain reaction. White needles raced across the concrete floor. Heat released during crystallization warmed the surrounding surface. The sudden transformation must have shocked her badly. Ray studied the floor stains again silently. Still doesn't explain why she died, he said. Reed nodded slowly. The chemistry explained the strange webs, but not the motive behind the trap. The answer appeared inside Lisa's phone records. Ray requested them after the laboratory demonstration. Several recent messages came from a man named Kyle. Kyle worked for a local chemical supply distributor. Reed noticed that detail immediately. Chemical suppliers sell large quantities of sodium acetate. Kyle also rented a nearby storage unit 2 months earlier. Not in the same row, but close enough. Financial records revealed another clue. Lisa had filed a civil lawsuit against Kyle recently. The case involved stolen product from his company warehouse. Lisa once worked there as a logistics manager. She discovered inventory numbers that did not match shipments. Her report threatened Kyle's job and possibly criminal charges. Ray drove to the distributor warehouse the same evening. Kyle's office desk contained several chemistry manuals. One page described supersaturated sodium acetate demonstrations. Ray photographed the highlighted section carefully. The method explained rapid crystallization using tiny seed crystals. Another page described reusable hand warmers using identical chemistry. Kyle clearly understood the reaction mechanism. Reed studied the photographs later in the lab. The motive now aligned with the strange science. Kyle needed to scare Lisa away from testifying. A dramatic chemical trick could intimidate someone easily, but he underestimated how frightening the reaction would appear. Lisa likely panicked when the floor suddenly crystallized beneath her. Stress or shock may have triggered the cardiac arrest. Ray closed the file slowly inside. Science had just pointed directly at their suspect. Ray expected the story to end with one reckless chemical trick. Instead, the deeper records revealed something larger. Lisa's lawsuit files described missing pallets of laboratory chemicals. The quantities were far beyond personal theft. Several shipments disappeared over 6 months quietly. Sodium acetate was only one of many items. Industrial solvents, reagents, and pharmaceutical precursors also vanished. Lisa had discovered the discrepancy during inventory reconciliation. Her internal report never reached company leadership officially. Someone intercepted it before the audit department reviewed everything. Ray now suspected a larger theft network inside the warehouse. Kyle might not have been working alone. Financial transfers linked him to 2 outside shell companies. Those companies purchased laboratory chemicals in bulk afterward. The trail pointed toward illegal resale operations across several states. Reed studied the documents with growing unease. That meant Lisa's discovery threatened more than one employee. Her testimony could expose a profitable black market supply chain. Kyle suddenly had very strong reasons to silence her. But the chemical trick suggested a different intention originally. The reaction looked dramatic, but rarely causes physical harm. Kyle probably planned intimidation, not homicide. Yet panic can kill as effectively as violence. Lisa walked into a chemical illusion designed to terrify her. White crystal webs exploded across the floor like supernatural frost. Heat spread under her feet instantly. Anyone might believe something toxic or radioactive was happening. Reed imagined the moment inside that storage room. Fear flooded faster than logic. And fear can stop a heart. Ray arranged a meeting at the distributor warehouse conference room. Kyle arrived wearing a cautious, controlled expression. Reed placed photographs and laboratory reports across the table. The images showed branching crystals covering the storage floor. Kyle glanced at them briefly without speaking. Ray slid the next picture forward. It showed the highlighted chemistry manual page from Kyle's office. This describes supersaturated sodium acetate crystallization, Ray said calmly. Kyle remained silent, but his jaw tightened slightly. Reed placed a small sealed container beside the photographs. Inside rested clear liquid, identical to his laboratory experiment. This solution can stay stable for hours, Reed explained. But one disturbance triggers instant crystal growth. Ray leaned forward slowly. Exactly what happened in that storage unit. Kyle finally spoke, his voice measured and careful. Lots of people understand basic chemistry demonstrations. Reed nodded politely. That is true, he said evenly. But few people recently purchased 20 pounds of sodium acetate. Ray produced the distributor inventory record next. The purchase appeared under Kyle's employee authorization code. Kyle's calm expression cracked slightly for a second. Reed tapped the container gently with a metal probe. White crystals spread through the liquid immediately. Kyle watched the reaction silently. Ray closed the folder slowly. No confession required, he said quietly. The chemistry already tells the story. Weeks later, the storage facility looked exactly the same again. Concrete corridors, metal doors, silent cameras. Nothing hinted at the strange chemistry that once appeared there. The floor inside Lisa's unit had been scrubbed repeatedly. Still, faint pale lines remained under bright light. Ray visited the location one final time. Reed walked beside him quietly. Science had solved the impossible part of the mystery. Liquids can indeed grow solid webs in seconds. Supersaturated solutions wait like loaded traps. One tiny trigger unleashes rapid crystallization instantly. The molecules rearrange into rigid crystal needles. Heat releases as the liquid becomes solid. That sudden transformation created the eerie white network. It looked unnatural, almost supernatural, but the explanation belonged purely to chemistry. Kyle eventually faced charges for chemical theft and fraud. The homicide investigation continued separately. Courts would debate intent, responsibility, and fear. But the physical evidence remained clear. Science revealed how the impossible event occurred. Ray looked again at the faint floor marks. Funny thing about chemistry, he said thoughtfully. Reed waited quietly beside him. A spill can look like nothing at first, Ray continued. Then suddenly the whole picture changes. Reed nodded once. Supersaturated liquids hide instability beneath calm surfaces. Sometimes people do the same, and sometimes the smallest disturbance reveals the truth. So here is the question that remains. If you saw the floor suddenly grow white crystal webs, would you stay calm enough to understand the science?